Hi, welcome to another episode of Wu Says. This is where we get real about the US, China, and everywhere and everything in between. It's two superpowers, but one global story. Now, this week, the world turns its eyes to Southeast Asia because the ASEAN Summit is underway. Leaders are all gathered, communiques are being drafted, and that all the cross-body handshakes are being awkwardly photographed there. But in a world that's shaped by the growing tug-of-war between the US and China, the question we're asking today is, what does this moment mean for ASEAN? So I'm Melisa Idris, and of course with me is Professor Thye, who has been studying US and China long before terrorists became headline news. And welcome to the studio. It's good to have you here, Prof.
Very glad to be here.
I do have to ask you as we start our conversation, is ASEAN just, I hate to say this, but a glorified talk shop? It's been criticized for being long on meetings, but short on muscle. And I wanted to ask you what your take is on that.
Well, I can confidently say it is less of a talk shop than before. And let us talk about why people think about it as a talk shop. The one can bring many different examples, but right at the crux of it is the way ASEAN is designed. Decision-making in ASEAN is by consensus. That means that the name ASEAN cannot be used unless everybody agrees to it. And getting consensus in a large group of people is a very difficult thing to do. So it looks like it was designed not to do anything by the way that decision-making was allowed.
Right.
But that's not really fair. One could say there are two types of talk shops. One is the hypocritical sort of workshop, where pronouncements are made, we want to do A, but nobody has the intention to follow up on it. That would be a true talk shop in the hypocritical sense.
Yes.
The other kind of talk shop is circumstance-constrained talk shop. There is a desire to do something, but one is prevented from doing it.
Okay.
To take an example, many cynics have pointed out to the 1971 Declaration of Sophan, Z-O-P-F-A-N, which was the ASEAN Zone of Peace, Freedom, and Neutrality. People often make fun of it because peace, look at what did you do about the civil war in Myanmar. ASEAN has passed lots of, the other members of ASEAN besides Myanmar had passed a number of resolutions calling for negotiations of the parties concerned, but has been unable to do it. So, not so great for peace. And freedom, then they say, look at most of the press in these countries, they're government controlled. But what that is often not said is, otherwise, foreign money would come in and buy up the local press. This we saw an attempt in Singapore in the 1970s, where a foreign, an outsider, tried to buy up a local newspaper, for example. So, but the important thing is freedom. Almost every ASEAN country has elections, except for a few. These are free elections, but not fair in every case. But the important thing is we are at least moving towards freedom. Then on neutrality, what can we do when the Chinese and the Americans are in conflicts over the use of the South China Sea?
Yeah.
If we were a big enough power, we'll beat them both off. But this is way beyond our ability to do, right? But on the other hand, they are just shouting at each other over it and they're not doing much. So that's okay.
It's just words. It's just shouting.
It is beyond our ability to control the people in conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the case of Myanmar, is ASEAN going to invade the country and impose peace on the people? That would certainly not be the ASEAN way.
Okay.
So, but as you can see, it is not just a talk shop. In this very conference, the latest example of why it's has become less of a talk shop,
Yeah.
is that ASEAN has now given the mandate to the ASEAN Center for Energy to draw up a plan for the ASEAN power grid, which is how to connect up the national electricity system. And that is very important because we have to achieve net zero emissions.
Right. So I just wanted to ask you, particularly because you said it's less of a talk shop now. At what point did you start thinking that you're seeing progress? And I can understand that there's a lot of excitement for the ASEAN power grid, but what would you say have been ASEAN's biggest wins so far that have convinced you that this is a bloc that has kind of concrete results?
You can see how people outside of ASEAN looks at ASEAN. The fact that ASEAN has got the Northeast neighbors to take ASEAN seriously, to form RCEP, which is the economic free trade area. They could have chosen to do it bilaterally with individual countries, but they chose to do it with us as a group because we are a much bigger market than before. The most important thing why ASEAN become less of a talk shop is because internal cohesion has increased from the fact that no harm has come out from being a member of ASEAN for so long. So the fact that no harm was created, that ASEAN Secretariat did not go rogue with its own agenda, gives confidence of the different countries in the use of the ASEAN mechanism, because there are some problems that cannot be solved unless you do it collectively. For example, look at the haze from the clearing of land.
Yes.
That clearly needed a regional solution.
Transboundary.
Transboundary,
Yeah.
because the cost is in one country, the large impact is in another, so you have to do it on the ASEAN level.
Okay.
And so there are two things. One is more confidence with each other. I think it's because it was a talk shop that makes everybody feel comfortable, so they're willing to do more. And what is doing more? They created RCEP, a free trade area. And then they use it to think of, we should try to maintain peace in the region with SOFAN. SOFAN is an aspiration, but it will be achieved when external circumstances shift.
Right.
That's when we can impose, help the solution. Like, for example, the US and the United Kingdom are giving nuclear submarines to Australia to put at the bottom of the South China Sea to deter the Chinese from aggressive action. ASEAN speaks with one voice. We are free to pass through South China Sea, but don't stay there permanently.
Okay. Okay. So another example of maybe shifting external circumstances is the current US-China trade war with the tariffs that have been imposed and the like. So if we were to zoom out when it feels like the world is splitting into two camps, so Team Washington and Team Beijing. How do you see this ASEAN dealing with this, having said the principles of Zopfan? When we think about how how ASEAN wants to remain relevant in the face of this US-China rivalry, how do you see ASEAN's role, ASEAN's future, ASEAN's positioning?
Well, I think ASEAN sees that there are two things that ASEAN should do, in my opinion. The first thing is we all have to galvanize our minds to come up with good suggestions to both of these countries about how to reduce the mutual suspicions between them. So we have to be actively coming up with practical solutions to how they can help solve the problem. That is one. The other one is ASEAN must be able to build a big enough coalition in GNP and in population in a timely manner so that this coalition is big enough to be able to demand to have the right to remain neutral between the two groups. So the idea is a coalition to be workable has to be quite small in number, so that you can get
so it doesn't
arguments.
get too unwieldy, too many people in it. Yes,
we have got population, but we also want to have big GNP in order to have enough respect. So bringing Korea, Japan in would be important, and better yet, bring in the people who are also scared. What is the way? Who's just got their wits scared out of them by the current conflict?
Yes,
which is,
they have a lot at stake.
Which is the Europeans. I think the middle power, because the Europeans have population and they have high GDP. So we will be able to achieve an organization that is big enough in population, large enough in GNP, if we can have a North-South coalition of middle powers, which will be, whole aim, is to keep the world trade system free.
So this is very much what you were talking about in our previous episode about this caucus of kind of buffer countries. Is that right?
Yes. That is, I think, something that ASEAN should also be doing. In other words, instead of instinctively going for a global South solution, but because we want to have a manageable numbers, so we should work with the global North. After all, we have a good record of working with the Koreans and the Japanese and Europe. That's where many ASEAN countries have traditionally sent their children to be educated. So we have, in a way, forgiven our colonial masters quite some time ago.
Okay.
We have gone beyond the anger of Bandung Conference.
Right.
We now talk with them as equal because both they and us are faced with a common challenge of keeping world peace.
Can I ask you what you think is where ASEAN is heading on a practical trajectory? If we look back at where ASEAN was, maybe decades ago, and now we want to look at where ASEAN's heading, where do you think it's going?
ASEAN is certainly putting up a coalition that is out to enhance the prosperity of its members. In today's conference, ASEAN Summit now includes ASEAN GCC Summit. It's because the GCC countries certainly have a lot of wealth that they need to manage, and we have to let them know that Malaysia is a good place where they could invest their money.
Yeah, bring us the oil money.
Well, certainly, but they have they themselves want to transform out
diversify.
of that dependence on oil, and we are partners with them in the diversification.
Okay.
And more importantly, we want to expand in a way that shows that we are friendly to everybody. A lot of our ASEAN members are joining BRICS, which seem to be very more to be identified with R and C in BRICS. So to have GCC with us, that's very good, because the GCCs are all very good friends of the United States. Qatar just gave Donald Trump an airplane, and Trump just came back from Saudi Arabia on a very positive note. So we are friends with the good friends of the United States.
Yeah.
And hence but all of this is creating mutual benefits based on the ancient principle of division of labor leads to specialization that increases the productivity level in each country, which means that the country has a bigger GNP.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Prof. Wu, for this episode of Wu Says, where we talk about US and China and everything and everywhere in between. We will be back with you for another episode next week. I'm Melisa Idris. Thanks so much for tuning in.